Okay, so we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff today.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one.
Manipulating the masses, propaganda, consumerism, all that jazz.
It all starts with, with Freud, actually.
Right, Sigmund Freud.
Mm.
But we're not talking about therapy today. This is about how his ideas were used.
To control people.
Exactly.
I mean, his nephew, Edward Bernays, he basically took those ideas about the unconscious and turned them into a weapon.
Weaponize the unconscious, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so let's start with Freud. Vienna at the turn of the century, right?
Right, very buttoned-up society, lots of repression.
And Freud comes along and says,
hey, guess what? There's all this stuff bubbling under the surface, these primal urges we're trying to hide.
and that was like a bomb going off.
Yeah, the Viennese elite were not amused. They saw Freud as a threat, someone who was going to disrupt the whole social order.
Don't rock the boat, right?
Exactly. But then World War I happens, and suddenly Freud's not looking so crazy anymore.
All that violence, the destruction, it's like, oh, maybe those repressed instincts he was talking about are real after all.
Right, and this is where Edward Bernays comes in.
Yeah.
Freud's nephew. He's working as a press agent in America.
During the war.
Yeah. He was promoting President Wilson and the whole idea of spreading democracy.
So propaganda, basically.
Basically.
Yeah.
But he saw how effective it could be. He realized that you could use these techniques to influence people's behavior on a massive scale.
If you can convince people to go to war.
You can convince them to do anything.
Right. And this is all happening at the same time as mass industrial society is taking off.
Exactly. America's factories are pumping out goods like crazy.
And they need people to buy them.
Right. There's this fear of overproduction. What if people stop buying?
Enter Bernays. He sees an opportunity. Instead of selling products based on need, he starts selling them based on desire.
A Wall Street banker, Paul Mazur from Lehman Brothers, actually said, we must shift America from a needs to a desires culture.
Needs you can fulfill, but desires.
Desires are endless.
And that's where Bernays really shines. He figures out how to use Freud's ideas to create those desires, make people crave things they didn't even know they wanted.
Like cigarettes for women. That was a huge taboo at the time.
Right. Smoking was seen as unladylike.
But Bernays changes all that with his brilliant Torches of Freedom campaign. He links smoking to the suffrage movement, to women's liberation.
So smoking becomes an act of rebellion.
Exactly. He stages this elaborate publicity stunt at the Easter parade as these young women light up their torches of freedom right in front of the cameras.
And it becomes a media sensation.
Cigarette sales skyrocketed.
It's amazing how a simple PR stunt can shift public opinion so dramatically.
It's not about the product itself. It's about the emotions tied to it.
The image, the feeling.
And Bernays was a master at creating that.
Yeah.
Celebrity endorsements, product placement, fashion shows, all these things we see every day. He was the one who pioneered them.
So we have him to thank for all the ads that make us feel like we need to buy something in order to be happy.
Well, he certainly played a major role in shaping that culture.
Okay, so Bernays is using these techniques to sell products. But then he starts getting interested in shaping public opinion on a larger scale.
He was fascinated by Walter Lippmann. He was a political writer who argued that the average person was just too irrational to be trusted with democracy.
The bewildered herd, right.
That's the one.
And Bernays sees himself as the guy who can manage that herd.
The engineer of consent.
Yeah.
By understanding and manipulating people's unconscious desires, you could control their choices.
So whether it's buying a certain brand of soap or voting for a certain candidate,
The same principles apply.
that's pretty unsettling.
It gets even darker when you consider that the Nazis were paying attention to Freud and Bernays too.
The Nazis. Really?
Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, he was very interested in Freud's work on crowd psychology.
They saw it as a tool for controlling the masses.
Exactly. And they took it to a terrifying extreme.
Rallies, symbols, carefully crafted messages, all designed to create a unified, unquestioning nation.
It's a chilling reminder that the same techniques used to sell toothpaste can also be used to sell hate and tyranny.
So the Nazis used these techniques for evil.
But after the war, America grapples with how to use them for good.
So we didn't reject these manipulation tactics altogether.
Not exactly. On one hand, you had President Roosevelt. He believed in democracy and the power of the people.
More about empowering the public rather than controlling them.
And then there was George Gallup, this pioneer of opinion polling. Gallup thought that if you ask people the right questions, they could be pretty rational.
So there's this tension, right, between trusting the public and fearing the mob.
Exactly. And after the horrors of Nazi Germany, that fear was pretty strong.
So psychoanalysis, it becomes this tool not just for treating individuals, but
For treating society as a whole.
like a way to prevent another Hitler from rising to power.
Yeah. Anna Freud, Freud's daughter, she was really influential in this. She shifted the focus from those deep, dark desires.
To social conformity.
Exactly. She thought that if you teach kids to follow the rules, you can strengthen their ego and keep those unconscious impulses in check.
Keep them from turning into Nazis.
Pretty much. And this thinking had a big impact on things like the National Mental Health Act.
So everyone's obsessed with controlling the unconscious, but meanwhile, consumerism is still chugging along.
Oh, yeah. And this is where Ernest Dichter comes in, the father of motivational research,
So he was like the original madman,
but with a Freudian twist.
using psychoanalysis to sell products.
He was obsessed with uncovering what he called the secret self of the consumer.
What makes people tick?
Exactly. He used all these in-depth interviews, projective tests, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Trying to figure out what people really wanted, even if they didn't know it themselves.
Yeah, he had this famous study with Betty Crocker, cake mixes.
Cake mixes!
He found that housewives felt guilty about using them,
Too easy.
like they weren't being good homemakers.
Well, what did he do?
He told Betty Crocker to change the recipe. Add an egg.
Just add an egg.
It made the whole process feel more involved, more like real baking.
And sales went through the roof.
He was a genius at figuring out how to tap into those deep-seated anxieties and desires.
Was he a genius or just a really good manipulator?
Maybe a little bit of both.
But it worked.
Oh, yeah. He helped create a whole new way of thinking about marketing and consumerism.
But this idea that buying more stuff equals happiness, it starts to fall apart in the 1960s, right?
Right. You have the student movement, the counterculture. They're rejecting this whole consumerist paradise.
They see it as a form of social control.
Keep people distracted, keep them buying stuff, while the world burns.
And Herbert Marcuse, he's one of the leading voices of this critique.
He argues that psychoanalysis has become a tool of repression.
The thing that was supposed to liberate us is actually being used to control us.
That's his argument. He coined the term one-dimensional man.
To describe this new type of consumer, right? Totally defined by what they buy.
And that makes it easy to manipulate.
So psychoanalysis goes from being the key to a stable society to being blamed for creating a society of mindless consumers.
It's a pretty dramatic shift. And it creates this space for the ideas of Wilhelm Reich to reemerge.
Wilhelm Reich, he was kind of a rebel in the world of psychoanalysis, right?
Total outcast. Freud basically disowned him.
Why?
Reich believed that our natural instincts are good.
It's society that's the problem, repressing those instincts.
Exactly. And that repression leads to all sorts of problems, both personal and social.
So it's all about liberating the self.
Yeah, that was his big thing. And his ideas resonated with the counterculture.
Make love, not war.
They were looking for a new way of being, something that broke free from the constraints of consumerist society.
So Reich's ideas start spreading. But how do they go from these fringe ideas to a full-blown movement?
Through people like Fritz Perls and the Evelyn Institute.
Evelyn, that was like the epicenter of the human potential movement. Right?
Yeah, it was all about exploring the full range of human potential, breaking down barriers, getting in touch with your feelings.
Pretty different from Anna Freud's vision of social control through conformity.
Totally different. This was about celebrating individuality, expressing your unique self.
So how do corporations respond to that? How do you sell products to people who are trying to define themselves as unique and different?
It's a challenge, but they figure it out. That's where Daniel Yankelovich and the Stanford Research Institute come in.
They developed this system called Values and Lifestyles Research, right?
VALS. It's all about understanding people's values, their beliefs, their aspirations.
So it's not just about demographics anymore, it's about psychographics.
And once you understand those underlying values, you can target your marketing much more effectively.
You can make people feel like they're buying a product that reflects their true selves.
Even if it's just a pair of jeans.
So corporations get even better at manipulating us.
They up their game.
And this new approach to marketing, it starts to influence politics too, right?
Absolutely. Politicians realize that they can use these same techniques to target voters.
Instead of talking about big ideas, they start appealing to people's individual desires and anxieties.
It's all about personalization.
And it works.
Oh, yeah. Look at Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. They were masters at this.
They understood how to connect with people on an emotional level.
And they used that to win elections.
So we've gone from this rigid society to like hyper-individualism. But are we really any freer?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, instead of being told what to think by, like, priests and kings. Now it's these marketers and politicians whispering in our ears, telling us what we want.
They're really good at it too.
Yeah. And the worst part is, they frame it as freedom. Like, you're in control, you're making your own choices, but are we really?
It's like we think we're choosing, but the options have already been chosen for us.
And they've gotten really good at using technology to figure out what buttons to push.
Social media, all that data they collect on us.
It's like they have a map of our minds.
And they use that to create these personalized messages that are like irresistible.
It's not just mass marketing anymore, it's micro-targeting.
They can figure out exactly what each individual person is susceptible to.
Yeah, and it creates these echo chambers where we're only exposed to information that confirms our existing beliefs.
So we become even more entrenched in our own little world.
And even more vulnerable to manipulation.
So what can we do about it? It feels like we're fighting a losing battle.
It's tough. But the first step is awareness. We have to understand how these techniques work, how they're being used against us.
So we can see through the illusions.
Exactly. Once you know how the trick is done, it's not so impressive anymore.
And then we can start to resist, be more critical of the messages we're bombarded with, seek out alternative perspectives.
It's about taking back control of our own minds, not letting ourselves be programmed by consumerism and political manipulation.
Reclaiming our agency.
That's the key. It's not easy, but it's essential if we want to preserve any semblance of a free society.
So where does this leave us with Bernays? This guy who was so influential in shaping this whole landscape.
I think his legacy is complicated. He unleashed these incredibly powerful tools, but those tools can be used for good or for evil.
He gave us torches of freedom, but he also helped create the advertising industry as we know it.
Yeah. He opened Pandora's box.
And we're still trying to figure out how to put all the bad stuff back in.
But the genie's out of the bottle. And as technology continues to advance, the potential for manipulation is only going to grow.
So it really comes down to us, right? We have to be vigilant, we have to be critical thinkers, we have to be willing to challenge the status quo.
We can't just passively consume whatever's being fed to us. We have to be active participants in shaping our own world.
That's a powerful message. So as we navigate this world of targeted ads, carefully crafted political messages, and influencers trying to sell us everything under the sun, remember this: awareness is power. The more we understand about how our minds work, the more we can protect ourselves from those who want to control them. The choice, ultimately, is yours.